Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, if you've ever hired someone or even just applied for a job yourself, you know this feeling, right? Finding the right person for the right role. It's incredibly difficult. It really is the core strategic challenge for pretty much any business out there.
Oh, absolutely. You could think of it as a sort of high-stakes filter system, really.
Yeah.
Our sources, they clarify that employee selection is fundamentally a screening process, a sorting process. The mission, it's about gathering crucial information, through tests, interviews, checks, and then using all that data.
To pick the one candidate who best fits.
Exactly, the one who best matches the specific requirements of the business.
And that phrase, best match, I think that's the key idea we need you, the listener, to really grasp here. Selection isn't, it's not just about picking the applicant with the longest CV or the most qualifications overall.
No, definitely not.
It's about finding that appropriate person, someone whose specific attributes, their qualifications, just align perfectly with the job that's open. Suitability, not just raw superiority. It's like finding a custom fit.
Precisely. And, well, our goal today is to give you a kind of complete picture of this whole thing, why getting it wrong is so costly, and how organizations actually navigate this, huge pool of applicants using specific tools, often in stages, to systematically narrow that field right down to that perfect, appropriate fit.
We really have to start with the costs, though, the strategic importance of getting this right. Because if you get selection wrong, the business pays. And it pays heavily. It's not just like the time wasted in the interview room. It's the ripple effect, the cascading costs that follow.
That's right. The initial expense advertising the role, the HR hours spent sifting through applications, that's just the beginning. The real damage from inappropriate selection, it hits your operational efficiency. It hits the bottom line. A poor selection process, it's directly linked to increased costs and, importantly, a measurable drop in productivity across the whole organization.
You think about the training budget, for example. If you bring in staff who are poorly qualified, maybe they looked okay on paper, but, well, you immediately face increased training costs just to get them up to speed to baseline competency. You're essentially paying again for skills you should have screened for up front.
And if that poor fit isn't caught and fixed quickly, you then run into really costly retention problems. Inappropriate selection often leads straight to increased job dissatisfaction, and what follows that, higher labor turnover. If the job doesn't meet the candidate's expectations, or maybe they feel out of their depth, they often leave pretty quickly.
Which means starting that whole expensive recruitment cycle all over again.
Exactly.
And this dissatisfaction, it feeds directly into other negative things, doesn't it? Like increased absenteeism rates.
Absolutely. When staff feel inadequate or maybe overwhelmed or they're under excessive pressure because they lack the core skills for the job, they're far more likely to call in sick, to miss work. It becomes this sort of self-perpetuating drag on output.
And for certain jobs, maybe specialized roles or high-risk ones, the stakes get even higher. You're talking regulatory issue, legal ones.
That's right. Selecting untrained staff, or staff without the right aptitudes, can lead directly to potential increases in accidents or maybe defect rates in manufacturing. This isn't just inefficient anymore. This can shift the cost from being an operational drag right into serious legal liability. Fines, significant claims against the business.
Wow. And this isn't just some, theoretical problem that might happen. It's a systemic challenge. It affects a lot of organizations.
It really does. What's quite striking here is just how common the problem is. We're talking about a majority struggle. The Australian Bureau of Statistics actually reports that over 50%, more than half, of businesses report difficulty recruiting suitable employees.
Over half.
Yes. And this difficulty, it directly impacts their productivity, it hampers revenue generation, and it even limits their ability to meet market demand. It really proves that selection is one of the most critical, maybe limiting factors for modern business management.
Okay, so if more than half of organizations are struggling with this fundamental task, let's get into the how. How do they try and solve it? How does an organization realistically take, say, 500 applications and turn that into one successful, appropriate hire?
Well, it's typically a structured process, a kind of progressive elimination, or maybe think of it like a funnel, usually involves about 6 key steps. It starts naturally with the sheer volume applications received. Then, immediately, the business moves into screening applicants. This is often a quick first pass to weed out those who clearly don't meet the absolute essential criteria from the job description.
Right, that initial filter. That must be crucial to just manage the numbers.
It is, and that leads to the shortlist candidate stage. This is where the real-time investment usually begins, and it's where organizations bring out the heavy hitters for gathering information like the carefully planned interviews.
Okay.
Following those interviews, you usually move into a verification step the referee checks, before the whole process hopefully culminates in extending the offer job to candidate.
That sounds fairly linear on the surface. But I guess the effectiveness really hinges on the quality of the tools used in those early screening stages, right? If the stakes are this high, what are the main tools organizations actually use to gather that specific, appropriate information?
Right, so we start with the basic filters. Application forms are probably the most universal tool, but they vary massively. Some are just basic contact details. Others are incredibly comprehensive, demanding detailed personal history, specific skills, quantified past experience. This gives that first crucial layer of data to work with.
And once you've filtered based on the paper or the screen, the human element comes in, the interview. We've all been through them. But from the company side, what's the key strategic goal of using this, probably the most common selection device?
Well, structure and consistency are really key here. A good interview should be well organized. It should ideally use common, preset questions for all candidates. That ensures a fair comparison. What's interesting is its dual purpose. The interviewer is trying to assess things like the candidate's motivation, their personality, their attitude, the soft skills that don't always jump off a resume. But at the same time, the candidate is learning too. They're assessing the organization, seeing if it's a fit for them. It's really a mutual learning opportunity.
Okay, but interviews, almost by definition, they're subjective, aren't they?
Yeah.
Which I suppose is why organizations often feel the need to back that up, to balance it with more objective data using tests.
Exactly. Tests aim to provide that objective layer. They can be written or practical assessments of things like aptitude, intelligence, or a specific ability. Our sources tend to split these into two main types. First, you have psychological testing. This aims to give insight into personality aspects like how might they respond in a team setting, what's their leadership style, how do they handle stress. Oh, okay, so that's focusing more on who the person is and how they might work, rather than just what they know.
Precisely. And the other major category is work testing. This is much more job specific. This is where you might test actual technical knowledge or specific skills needed for the day-to-day tasks. Can they actually operate that specialized software? Can they demonstrate fluency in a language the job requires? That sort of thing.
And of course, we can't ignore the rise of online selection tools. They must offer huge convenience, especially as a first filter.
Oh, absolutely. Online tools offer tremendous efficiency, especially for that early stage, high volume screening. Things like simple multiple choice knowledge tests or automated skills assessments, they can handle scale. But, and this is big, but the source material is very clear on this. They are efficient, yes, but they are absolutely no substitute for a face-to-face interview.
Why is that?
Well, they lack the context. They lack the ability to assess personality, motivation, that crucial appropriate match dimension we talked about. Got it. Okay, so finally, before making the offer, there's verification, background checks, and, for some roles, medical examinations.
Yes, background checks are critical for basically verifying the data you've gathered so far. Contacting referees, maybe agencies, past employers. Just confirming that claimed experience and performance history actually checks out. This is where you confirm that the person who presented so well in the interview actually delivered in their previous role.
Right. Due diligence.
Exactly. And medical exams, they're usually reserved for jobs that demand specific physical attributes. Think highly safety-sensitive roles or maybe specialized police force assessments, things like that.
And just a final practical point on the process area. Organizations nearly always wait until the successful applicant has actually accepted the job before telling the unsuccessful ones, right?
Oh, yes. That's standard practice. It's pure risk management. They don't want to burn bridges with their second choice, just in case the first choice suddenly gets cold feet or accepts another offer.
Classic organizational self-preservation, as you say. Okay, now here's where it gets really insightful for you, the listener. We've laid out the process, the tools, the necessity of it all, but these methods clearly aren't perfect. We already know over half of businesses struggle to recruit suitable staff despite using this kind of comprehensive process. That strongly suggests the tools themselves might have some serious limitations. We really need to look critically at the weaknesses here. Yes, this is the essential critical thinking part. Let's start with the king of selection methods, the interview. Its main advantage, as we said, is providing that direct personal assessment, gauging appropriateness, motivation, cultural fit.
Sure.
But the drawback seems pretty huge, presentation bias. So the people are just brilliant at interviews. They're charming, articulate, confident, but they might not be, let's say, completely honest about their actual capabilities. And crucially, the interview setting itself doesn't really let the business assess their actual skills or performance on the job.
Absolutely. It can end up being more of a test of their interview technique than their actual technical ability or work ethic. And interestingly, that same kind of vulnerability pops up with psychological testing. These tests are designed to reveal personality aspects, which sounds vital for team dynamics and things like that.
Right. But again, they fundamentally rely on the candidate giving honest answers, don't they?
Yeah.
If someone thinks they know what the right answer is for, say, a leadership question, they can just choose that, couldn't they? Skewing the results.
They certainly can try. And perhaps even worse, our source material highlights a really serious concern about test reliability. Not all psychological tests out there, the ones used by businesses, actually have the necessary statistical validity. They might not reliably measure what they claim to measure.
Wow. So you could be basing a really important hiring decision on, well, on a faulty instrument.
Precisely. And if you do that, the risk of making a poor hiring decision increases exponentially. That could directly contribute to that 50% struggle statistic we mentioned earlier.
So the two most common tools, interviews and psych tests, are both potentially undermined by subjectivity and, well, unreliable data. What about the more practical work testing? Surely that's got to be more immune to these issues.
Work testing is generally the most objective measure of specific technical skills. That's definitely its strength. However, even work testing isn't perfect. It introduces its own variables. It's often conducted in a somewhat artificial environment, a testing room, maybe a simulation. It's removed from the actual pressures and nuances of the real job. So simple nervousness under pressure might prevent a perfectly capable applicant from demonstrating their true real-world abilities.
Okay. And I suppose these tests might perfectly capture technical competence, like can they code this thing?
Yeah.
But they might miss those broader skills. Like you might find a great coder, but the test won't tell you if they can lead a team or negotiate project scope or handle unexpected workplace conflicts.
Exactly right. It can be quite narrow. And finally, just touching back on those convenient online selection methods. While they're efficient for dealing with volume, the main drawback is pretty clear. They are fundamentally impersonal. You get zero real indication of the actual person behind the screen, their personality, their drive, and because they're often so easy for candidates to complete, they can sometimes lead to an overwhelming flood of applications, especially for lower skilled roles, which paradoxically can make sorting them effectively without that human context really difficult, potentially defeating the whole point of efficient screening.
So it's this constant strategic trade-off, isn't it?
Mm.
Organizations have to balance the need for efficiency in screening with the inherent flaws, the subjectivity present in almost all the available tools. This whole discussion really illustrates why employee selection ends up being such an intensely costly, multi-stage process. It's designed fundamentally to find that one specific candidate who best matches the job's attributes, relying on this complex mix of applications, tests, interviews, background checks. It's all about risk mitigation, really.
It is, and yet we keep coming back to that central tension, don't we? We know, factually, that over half of businesses struggle to hire appropriately. So when we understand that the selection methods that are most heavily relied upon, interviews and psychological tests, are also the ones potentially most susceptible to applicant dishonesty and, crucially, questionable measurement reliability. Well, the question for you, the listener, becomes kind of unavoidable, doesn't it? What inherent level of acceptable unreliability is actually baked into modern hiring practices? And if these often subjective methods are driving the selection for potentially more than half the workforce, what's the compounding risk to productivity when the most common selection tools might also be the most fallible?
That is quite a staggering thought to end on. The next time you're preparing for an interview, perhaps, or maybe you're the one reviewing a stack of resumes, really consider the documented pros and cons of the tools being used either to evaluate you or the candidates you are evaluating. This whole process is clearly necessary, but as our sources show us today, it is far, far from perfect. We hope this deep dive helps you navigate that imperfect system with maybe just a little bit greater insight.